The scoping practice area is all about coming up with an identification of the set of products that's going to be built as a product line, and making a determination of what's in and what's out, and coming up with a justification for why it's a particular set and not some other set. And your overall goal here is to come up with a bound on what's in and what's out that is profitable for the organization. You are scoping out a particular set of products that you feel will bring you benefit in the marketplace, that will help you make money, and that will recover the investment that you made to create the product line in the first place and create the core assets. And who is responsible for coming up with that initial scope, and who eventually makes the connection between that initial scope and the business prospects? Again, this depends on having the cross-disciplinary team involved in the creation of your product line, so that it's not just the technologists who are doing the scope, but the marketing people and the business people also have a role in determining the ultimate scope. So you do need to consider things like, what is the current market looking like right now, and what's our competition doing? One of the worst things you can do in the scoping effort is to go through a scoping exercise, identify a potential set of products, get ready to start designing and coding, and then find out from the marketing or business people that, well, this is all well and good, but our competitor already has these products in the marketplace for half of what it would cost us to develop. So why are you people wasting time doing this? Well, they're wasting time doing this because that connection between the technological feasibility as seen by the developers was not connected with the market and business reality of the marketplace. So when you come to scoping, it may start out as, for example, an initial list of products that we have in the marketplace now, plus maybe some potential future products, as the working set of products that are within the scope of a product line. So it could be pretty vague. The example here says that we're building a product line of web software, which is already pretty vague in and of itself. But the assumption is that if you're in this market, you're obviously in the market for browsers. A full-blown aircraft flight simulator is definitely out. And an email handler, well, do you want to provide an email capability in this set of web-based products? So there may be some initial indecision. You may be able to make some clear-cut decisions about, yes, we are going after the healthcare market, and we are going after the patient records business as opposed to the patient monitoring business. So we're not going to get into sophisticated imaging equipment. We're simply dealing with patient billing, because, boy, when I look at some of the bills I get, that's where the money is. So there's an initial scoping decision there, and then as you proceed through the analysis of what's common and variant, and you start talking to your business and technical people, you get a better appreciation for what's truly within the scope. This diagram is a representation of various stages of scoping. So over in diagram A, or figure A of the diagram, this is the space of all possible products we could ever think about building. We have the necessary the necessary domain expertise, or at least we think we have, to go after this huge range of products. And then in B, you start to get serious about, okay, which ones do we really think we have a chance at creating, whether it's on the basis of technological feasibility or business prospects. So you start making some high-level decisions about what's in and what's out. And so you narrow the area of uncertainty in B to, you've got some identified things that are clearly within the scope. The rest of the square is clearly outside of the scope. And the intermediate gray area, there's still a large area of uncertainty about what might be in and what might be out. In C, we have definitely narrowed down to a good candidate set of products. and there's still an area of uncertainty surrounding that, but it's not as much as in the previous case. In the final case, in D, we have a very rigid definition of our scope. We are very clear about what's in and what's out, and there's no ambiguity. That's not necessarily where you want to be, because in the time it takes you to set up your product line, market opportunities may arise, and so you don't want to preclude yourself from going after certain markets on the basis of capabilities you are planning to develop for your product line. An example of this is Celsius Tech. Air defense systems on board a ship are part of the Ship System 2000. They saw a nearby market for shore-based air defense systems. So if you already have the capability to shoot something out of the sky from a moving ship, then shooting it out of the sky from a fixed platform on shore is likely to be a simpler problem, particularly when you don't have to take the ship dynamics into account. So on the basis of the capabilities they had established for Ship System 2000, they were able to go after this air defense market and get into it very quickly because they already had a substantial amount of the product components and the core assets to support that. Cummins similarly started off in the automotive division with their product line, but they made a conscious decision during the analysis to bring in people from the other divisions within Cummins as well, the industrial and the power generation division, and that allowed them to go after the industrial market. So the engines that are used in ski lifts and road making equipment and winches and marine diesels. Pardon? Industrial-sized generators. And standby generators, yeah. So anything that isn't a big heavy diesel engine in a truck, but it still is a big heavy diesel engine. And Motorola, the FlexWorks family of one-way pagers is basically a major portion of the family for two-way pagers. A radio is a radio is a radio, and if you already have assets in one category with some generalization, they can support the other category. So don't be too rigid about the scope you're in. If Celsius Tech had viewed themselves as being solely in the ship business, they would have locked themselves out of the shore-based air defense market. So the fact that there's a slight uncertainty about the true scope is not necessarily a bad thing. How do you do all of this? One way to do it is apply the what to build pattern. This is one of the patterns in our collection that deals with not just the scoping practice area, but things like market analysis, business case development, technology forecasting, and understanding relevant domains. So it's a subset of practice areas aimed at coming up with an answer to what should be built as a product line. And we'll have more to say about that in the patterns module. But you need to look at the proposed products within the scope of the product line. So what products do you have in the marketplace right now? Are any of those products going to be a basis for your product line? What does your competition have in the marketplace? And are we going after something that they've already got a lock on? Gather documentation of existing products or existing artifacts within your organization. Gather literature about the competition. You'll be sending your marketers and business development people to trade shows. Make sure they keep an ear out for what's coming down in the competition. Look at the kinds of capabilities that you would expect to deliver in these products. So this is starting to get into the feature analysis. So the work that you are doing, potentially in parallel with the scoping in the area of domain analysis or understanding relevant domains, complements the work that's being done in scoping. So does the business case development. One way of representing your product line is to draw a context diagram of the bounds of what the product line is going to address and the external entities with which the products have to interact. This is a representation of a context diagram for a personal sound system. So this is a portable music player. And the product line bounds are shown in the large gray rectangle here. So you have things in here that are going to be part of the product line. You have things like the broadcast system and the recorded media that are definitely things that we as the organization don't produce, but this product or set of products is going to have to interface with those, and so there will be issues of standards and interfaces and so on to take into account to deal with these external entities. So this is a way of capturing in a single diagram the rough bounds, the initial bounds of your proposed product line. This diagram is incidentally a concocted example that also shows what can happen if important stakeholders don't play a role in the scoping decision, because this one here deals with the older tape-based Sony Walkman type player. So for some reason, when these people, and this is a concocted example, Sony certainly didn't do this, but the people here who decided to create a product line of personal sound systems totally missed the market for MP3 players. So if you have technologists who are solely locked into the old tape-based or AM radio-based set of players, and they are the ones who are making the decision about the future direction of the company without connecting with the marketers who are keeping an eye on what the competition is doing and the technologists who are keeping an eye on things like MP3, then you are locking in yesterday's solutions as today's product line. Conducting stakeholder workshops is another way of making sure that you get input from more than just the technologists who are going to be creating the software. So make sure that anybody who's a stakeholder in your product line is, if not directly interviewed, that at least there is stakeholder representation and knowledge of stakeholder concerns within your organization, like the knowledge of healthcare and safety standards, for example. People who have a very different view of the products you build than the technologists do. Also, make sure that you address not just current products, but future products. It's going to take you some time to become a routinely operating product line organization, and in that time, things may change. So you need to be careful about projecting likely future features and future needs of your customer segments and users. Don.
So would you could take a simplistic approach of just saying the simply future, or would you go through the exercise of potentially allocating to future versions so that you could article that way? Or it depends.
Oh, you mean allocate sets of features to future products?
So you're either saying, are they simply current or future, or is an approach to sort of saying, this is in the 2010 version, this is in the 2011 version, trying to map
Yes,
them out.
and in fact, that would probably be the recommended way to do it, is that you stagger these releases within what is feasible based on the expertise of the people, the amount of resources that you can devote to it, particularly money. And so, yeah, absolutely, a staggered approach like that says we're going to release increasing or subsets of increasing capabilities in the products as the core asset base evolves. Absolutely. Another representation is to draw what's called an attribute product matrix, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment. And finally, come up with some product line scenarios. Similar to the use case or change case analysis that you did for the features and the requirements, if we had this particular product in our product line, we don't have one in the marketplace yet that looks like this, but if we had something like this in the marketplace, how would people use it? What would it be like? What kinds of capabilities would it produce? So come up with some exploratory scenarios that would help you understand what might be a potential future product that you could base on the capabilities and the expertise you have right now. This is an example of an attribute product matrix where you have a mix and match set of capabilities in your personal audio system, shown in the leftmost column here, and then the other columns deal with segmenting these capabilities for particular business opportunities or particular market segments. So we have a low-cost model with a set of capabilities that we could potentially sell into that particular market, and all the way up to a high-end model which contains more options. In fact, this approach of using an attribute product matrix is part of a scoping method from the people at Fraunhofer, where they have numerical functions associated with each cell of the table aimed at maximizing or minimizing a particular quantity, like maximizing the amount of reuse and minimizing development time, or whatever it is, kind of like a mini COCOMO model for each cell in the table. And by summing the numerical scores for each column, you can get a quantitative assessment of whether it's better to go after the high-end, high-profit market or the lower-end, lower profit but higher volume market. So it's a way of quantifying your scoping decision. And in fact, it's really a roll-up of several practice areas: scoping, market analysis, business case, and so on. The method is called Pulse Echo. So again, it's part of that product line software engineering method. ECO is not an acronym, it's simply short for economic scoping. So this is their way of characterizing candidate products that could be part of a product line. And it's a way of actually implementing several of the framework practice areas in a package called Pulse Echo. So business analysis, market analysis, doing some measurement and tracking in the sense of you're associating quantified measures with particular subsets of capabilities to establish whether or not we should be going after particular market segments. The biggest risk in scoping is either the scope is so big that you can't possibly tackle it with the resources you have, or it's so small that you'll never make any money on it because of the investment you've had to make in setting up the core asset base. Simply selling one or two products isn't enough to recover your initial startup costs.
Yeah, the model used by my current customer on the satellites is they aren't building new ground systems. They all have to work with the existing ground systems that are out there now. The only exception, they may throw them a little money so the comm frequencies are there so they can communicate with it, but no new ground systems. That chops down quite a bit. So
the other thing you may run into is, because of the resources that are made available or not, the typical way to address a shortfall in resources is to de-scope. But you can only do that so far and still make money. At some point you have to decide, have we crossed the break-even threshold in the wrong direction? And so we're now we're going to all this trouble to create a core asset base that will only support one or two products, and the projections are we can't possibly make any money on just one or two. And again, of course, this all assumes that you've already done your business case homework to determine whether or not a reduction in scope has that kind of effect. So there are all these connections across the practice areas in the framework. For pedagogical purposes, we break them out as separate practice areas. But as you actually ramp up to be a product line organization, you will find yourselves enacting several of these in parallel. And then the other big one is that you don't have essential stakeholders playing a role in the decision. So the scope is accidentally determined by the developers, for example, without any connection to business or marketing. Some references here. The one from DeBow, the second one there, is the one for the Pulse echo method. We've talked about a scope as being what's in and what's out, and an identification of a proposed set of products. And we've also talked about the requirements for a whole set of products, and common requirements and variant requirements that allow you to distinguish one product from another. So how do these two artifacts relate? There's a scoping document that describes what's in and what's out. There's a requirements document or a requirements model that covers the range of commonality and variability, and that basically also describes what's in and what's out, or at least what's in. So what's the relationship between these two artifacts? Or how do they differ?
Hopefully the scope definition will keep you from building the wrong product with the right components. Your cassette player versus an MP3 player.
Yes, the scope definition should inform the requirements process, and any requirements analysis you do for the product line should be within that scope. The requirements analysis may also influence the scope, though, in the sense that once you get into the more detailed requirements, you may find out opportunities to broaden the scope or reduce the scope because it's simply too much to take on. These artifacts are produced for different audiences at different levels of detail. So you can think of the scope definition as being like a marketing brochure that distinguishes one product from the next and potentially distinguishes your products from those of the competition. But you couldn't give that description to the developers and say, here are your requirements for the products I want you to build. So these are written for different audiences at different levels of detail. But they do complement one another, and at least initially, the requirements analysis work that you do should be within the defined scope.